Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Whether you're looking for a quiet table for two or hosting a large crew, Peacock Alley is the place to be in downtown Bismarck, and a proud sponsor of Plain Talk, North Dakota's #1 political podcast.
I mean, we're trying to get people to actually listen to this podcast.
This iconic grill and bar is where Bismarck history, delicious food, one-of-a-kind drinks, and big ideas come together. Peacock Alley, located on the corner of 5th and Main, downtown Bismarck.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you this Friday in January. We are, how many days are we in now, Chad? 12 days into the legislative session?
I think days 12 or 13 today. We're rolling. It's almost over.
It doesn't feel an hour or so more than 100. So,
no, yeah. I can't decide if it feels like they've been in town for 2 days or 2.5 years at this point.
Yeah.
But
well, we are plugging along. And today we're going to be talking about an interesting bill. You know, I guess I've kind of watched other states that have had this debate over access to porn online. We all know it's there. We all know there's a lot of content on there that children shouldn't be looking at. There's also some content there that adults shouldn't be looking at either, frankly. But I'm not here to judge how people want to spend their free time. But I think when it comes to kids, we need to be making sure that it's just too available. I mean, even from when I was a kid, it's not the same world. It's a different world. It's so accessible. So what do we do about it? Is requiring some sort of age verification from these websites the right way to do it? Other states have tried it. I think we've yet to entirely see how those laws may end up in terms of how the courts view them. I feel like a lot of that's still yet to be settled. But here in North Dakota, we have a legislative session going on, and we have a bill proposed to look at age verification for those sorts of websites in porn websites, basically in, for the state of North Dakota. The sponsor of that bill is State Representative Steve Swiontek. He's a Republican from Fargo. Representative Swiontek, how are you?
Great, thank you.
Outline your bill for us. What does it do?
Okay, well, what it requires is that for the specific adult entertainment sites that have 33 and a third more of adult types of things, such as pornography, would have to verify the age of an individual in order for them to enter the site. And then it would allow parents or whatever that if they felt it was inappropriate, that they could sue these websites for allowing their child to go on there. That's basically it in a nutshell. I know it's like an 8-page bill, but it kind of covers all the parameters and talks about the specifics when it comes to what they define as pornography or adult entertainment.
Representative Swiontek, thanks for your service and thanks for being on today. I think that, a bill like this is sort of like, to me, of course we should be doing this. Of course we should be doing this, particularly after going through last session where people wanted to go through libraries and, if there was a drawing of genital, get rid of the books. Well, the whole time, a 14-year-old kid has access to far more on his phone than he does here. Are you getting support for your bill from those folks who historically have wanted to go through libraries and sort of clean those things up? Are they supporting this bill, or do you know?
Chad, I have not heard from any of those individuals. I think as the awareness becomes more prevalent, I think I'm seeing people from, Republicans, Democrats, moderates, independents, conservatives that are very interested in this, especially for those of us that have, children or grandchildren, that type of thing. Never in my wildest dreams at age 70 that I would be thinking about doing this type of bill. And nobody did approach me on this as far as saying, Steve, would you introduce this on our behalf or whatever? Just doing research over this the last 3 or 4 months, having grandchildren, boys, age 9 and 6, and a granddaughter, 12, and doing the research on it, I'm really worried and concerned where 75% of children at age 17 have stated that they have actually seen an adult website or porn site. And it's out there. And so I was looking at, okay, how can we do a bill that's appropriate and have the parameters there for minors, but yet understand that there's a constitutional right of free speech, that type of thing. And also factoring in like libraries. You mentioned that, Chad, about libraries in that area. Hopefully with the 33 and a third, that portion would take care of libraries and that type of thing. Because normally libraries wouldn't have anything greater than that. And kind of looked at it from the Utah. This really was based on Utah law and working with the Attorney General here in North Dakota and talking to him and his team as far as what is this a good one that based on his experience and knowledge.
So how do we, I mean, it seems like one of the bugaboos. And by the way, I should point out that our governor, when we were having a debate back during the campaign last year, our governor brought this up kind of out of the blue. We didn't ask him about it, but he brought it up. This is something he's got kids at home still. So, as a parent, I think if you're a modern parent and you aren't concerned about this, you maybe aren't doing your job because, the devices are everywhere. The internet's everywhere. And frankly, I want my kids on the internet. I want them doing
Right.
good things on the internet and productive
Absolutely.
on the internet. But this other content's out there. So the thing is how do we protect? One of the problems is always defining what constitute the sort of material that we don't want them to see. And that's always the bugaboo, right? And we have the famous, Justice Potter Stewart, who said, what is porn? I know it when I see it. That's the bugaboo. That's the tough thing. So yes, you have a percentage, 33 and a third. But what counts in that 33 and a third? Is it a picture of the Venus de Milo statue? Is it a Renaissance painting? I mean, I think we all agree what porn is to a point, but also when we went through some of those debates over the library bills or the book ban bills, I mean, there are people who think that a book referencing the fact that gay people exist is pornography. So how do we settle that?
I think based on the bill itself, when you look at page 2, it gets pretty specific as far as what that video is or that entertainment shows. And, you can read about it as far as very specific when it comes to certain parts of the body, that type of thing. And so I think it touches on that, Rob, and explains what we're looking at and specifically. And when I read it and reviewed it and so forth, I said, yes, that's probably something that is what you see on porn sites. So it does go into specific detail. And also it's a video versus a different than a book, like what you mentioned, and the examples you gave, how I see this in here on this bill, and I could be wrong on that, is that wouldn't be applicable in this area.
So I'm reading page 2 and I'm blushing a little bit this
Yes.
morning, reading through that bill. I wasn't prepared for some of that, but I mean, you have to do that, right? I mean, you have to be that descriptive. So how does this mechanically work? How do you validate that somebody's 18 years of age or not 18 years of age?
Okay. I'm not an IT person or a techie in that area, but there is a technology there, Chad, that other states use this where they do a digital verification. And whether it be a government ID, and in a lot of cases, it's not kept online or whatever, that you may have to, every time you go in, have to show that. In some cases, you don't. Some of them have that wherewithal that you could either actually show a scan of an individual, and you could determine that individual is age 18 or older. What they have found is that, for example, right now, the adult entertainment industry is suing the state of Texas and it is in the U.S. Supreme Court right now. And they had oral arguments on it this last week. And like I said, I'm not an attorney, but the Supreme Court was very sympathetic to what Texas is doing and referenced that there is the technology out there and there is a state's issue of protecting minors in that area. And they talked about the technology that's available. So that's kind of what this is looking at, is a digital verification, and it's leading it up to the adult sites rather than like Apple or Google or whatever, because the technology is there for them to do it rather than an Apple or a Google in that area.
And I guess one of the things here is it's not the way your bill is set up. It's not necessarily the state that's doing the enforcing, right? It would be up to if a private citizen, if they feel, or I guess a class of people, if they were to band together and file suit.
That's correct, Rob.
What you're creating in the law is a liability, not an enforcement.
That's right.
That if they're not complying with the verification law, then the punishment is, well, you could get sued, and we've created liability for you in the law.
That's correct, Rob. In fact, is this foolproof? No, it's not. I mean, there can be individuals that can figure out how to get around it or whatever. There could be through a VPN, virtual private network, or whatever, those types of things. But if it can reduce the exposure or ability of individuals, and I really worry about boys, in that age. We're seeing now statistics showing that 8-year-olds and 10-year-old boys are seeing this, and that adolescent psychological change in looking from age 12 to 17 to 18. They get a different perspective of sex and everything when they see these adult sites, because over 80% of the sites are violent. In the background, they think, oh, this is typical, this is normal when it comes to this area. And we really need to address that. When you look at adult entertainment sites have more monthly visits than Netflix, Twitter, and Amazon combined. Now, I understand that's adults too. So, I mean, it's not just adolescents, but that's kind of the background and the premise of it, Rob.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I guess one thing on just
Sure.
age verification was, how do we stop this from adults are allowed to look at this? I mean, and nobody's saying that how you spend your free time, it's up to you. No, I don't think anybody on this call is making any judgments. But the thing is how do we protect where we're not basically creating registries of people who are looking at this? I mean, that's a very private thing. If you're deciding to explore some of this stuff with yourself or with a partner and you're engaging in it, maybe you're one of the producers, and now you have to create registries of that the people who are looking at this stuff. How do we protect their privacy?
Well, I think probably, when I've looked at the other states, and you look at Utah as an example, the state of Utah is not developing a registry. Okay. It's basically, as an example, Pornhub is one of the sites. And so they would have to develop a registry. In most cases, from what I understand, it might be different. They do not develop a registry or keep that online. Now, if a person goes out there and purchases and has a annual plan subscription for this area, I'm guessing they probably have a registry there already as far as
credit card information.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that you're not an attorney. I just want you to keep your hopes up. There is a bill that's coming through that after the end of this session, you'll be able to sit for the bar so you can keep the dream alive.
I was just, yes, that's very true. I'd have to serve here 4 years so I could put up my shingle back home in Fargo, and hopefully you two could be clients as well.
Very good. Well, Rob needs a lot of attorneys, so that'll work. It's a well-paying gig. So
from time to time, I do. Yeah.
How are you feeling about the prospects of this bill? I mean, obviously it hasn't had its hearing yet, but I mean, it's great bipartisan sponsorship. It seems like, to me, if we can do this, if we can protect people of age, that it seems like it's a no-brainer. If we're already doing it in other states, how are you feeling about the prospects of this?
Chad, I'm very encouraged. You never take anything for granted. But, I really reached out to, as you said, a bipartisan group. And, you have some conservative individuals on this. You have some individuals that are more moderate to liberal. And they were very open and receptive to the idea that, we have to address this and we have to deal with it without having government intervention by the state of North Dakota. But is there some unique things that we've learned from other states that can make this applicable? So I really am encouraged by it. And I do have a passion for this one as far as trying to make a difference if we can. Is it perfect, Chad? No, it's probably not. And working with people, you know how legislation is. Want to work with and make it for the best interest of parents in North Dakota or guardians of kids in this area.
And do you have any indications that the governor might be walking down the hall and helping to pass this thing? Have you had conversations with him?
I haven't talked to him yet about this. I've talked to him about other issues and everything, but I will. I do plan on, because I saw in your article, Rob, that that was on one of the debates. So that I wasn't aware of that until I read that.
And when he said it spontaneously too, it wasn't even that he was asked
Right.
about. Obvious. I mean, that indicates. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that indicates to me that it's on his mind, and he likes the concept. So that'll be. It always helps to have to know that the guy who's got to sign the bill ultimately is amenable.
And I work closely with the Attorney General on this, and I have to compliment Attorney General Wrigley, because he really looked at the other, because there's 19 states. Whichever article you look at, some say 19, some say 20 states. And I believe South Dakota, I think, has just has passed either by one body or both House and Senate in South Dakota have passed a law. I don't know if it's similar to this one, but he was very supportive and helpful on this as well. And they support this legislation too.
Well, and I think the thing is it's trying to implement something that is already law. It's already the law that children can't be accessing porn. That's already law. And culturally, just about everybody agrees children should not be looking at porn. It's so the question is now that we have this wild west of the internet, how do we protect the rights of adults to do what they want while making sure that kids aren't accessing content they shouldn't? That's the balance.
Absolutely.
And this bill, like I said, isn't perfect. I mean, one of the problems too is the internet goes everywhere. So what do we do with hot sites hosted, in places where the law of North Dakota, the law of the United States doesn't reach?
And Rob, one thing, you can be one step ahead of it, and then here a month or a couple weeks later, you may be 2 steps behind because of what technology has done and changed. They are,
and particularly in the porn industry. I don't know. I'm actually kind of fascinated by how much technological advancement, like online credit card transactions, started with a porn industry innovation. The VHS porn industry innovation. I guess it's the law of supply and demand.
And you know what, Rob? What I found very concerning is that I've been mentioning about boys, adolescent boys. They're starting to see a large trend of young girls that are going into this, and they're getting the idea that this is the norm as far as how sexuality is and things like that. And, we want parents involved with that role and others, or guardians if possible, and hopefully, but it is concerning. And hopefully this is a start. This is something to look at, and we can try to address it from North Dakota's perspective.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good bill. It's going to be an interesting debate for sure.
It will be. Absolutely.
Can we ask you about some of the other issues before the legislature?
Sure.
What do you think about the governor's property tax proposal? And there's been a little bit of a war of words between the governor and a commissioner from your community in Fargo, Commissioner Pepcorn, slapping at each other a little bit over this. But what are you making of that proposal so far?
I think the proposal is good. I think there's a momentum in that area. Is it, again, perfect? No. But yet, when I look back home in Fargo, I think about what we have gotten from Prairie Dog program, from, the governor's proposing additional funding for Grand Forks, Fargo, and Dickinson airports. When you look at all the additional funding that we have, we haven't raised state taxes at all over the years. In fact, it's been reduced. Now, I understand we have the oil, which has been very beneficial, but I think, we all are challenged in this area, and what can we do better to be more efficient and so forth. And I think that, people may be critical of it, but unfortunately, I haven't seen any suggestions that they've come up with and say, okay, how about this alternative? Or let's look at this. There are individuals that have a tendency of just saying, boom, it's not good, and this is the status quo. Well, the public was when I went around door to door, Rob, this last fall in 2024, the biggest issue was property tax and what are you going to do about it? And I think that they provided us a pause to sit back and see what is the best way and how can we address this issue. And if we don't do it, I think there will be another initiated measure. Could it be in 26? I don't know. But then it'll be out of the hands of the legislature. And then,
and the reality is it's going to pass at some point, right?
Sure,
I mean, as
right.
the chair of the No on Measure 4 campaign, I'm not ready to go through this again.
No, I'm not either.
I think the proponents of Measure 4, they got the message across, and if the legislature and the local political subs don't hear it, they're pretty tone deaf. In my
Right, I would agree.
So, Representative Swiontek, you're back after taking a big break. This is your second session. When did you serve the first time? Was it in the 80s?
I served from 76 to 84.
And so tell us about the differences between 76 and 84 and 20 in
Sure.
this term.
Chad, I think when I was first elected in 76, I think I was 22. And that was the first year that the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled that we cannot have multi-districts. So, for example, in Fargo, Cass County, you could vote for 10 representatives and 5 senators. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that unconstitutional. I believe John Kelly, Representative Tish Kelly's husband, he was on the court, went to court and they ruled that unconstitutional. So that was, and I think that was in Grand Forks and Minot had that multi-senatorial districts. And so then it was broken out. So I was the first one to run in that district, 45 at 22. Our first session in 77, we had 50-50 in the House, 50 Democrats and 50 House members.
So
and
a little different now.
I kind of look, Chad, at what Minnesota is doing, and they weren't even able to settle. But we got it done. We had Dick Baucus, Democrat leader, and Earl Strinden, and it got done. Yeah, there was give and take, and boom, we pressed on, did the business. In 79 session, we had 2/3 control of the House and Senate. In 81, we had 2/3 control, but with a Republican governor. Previous to that, it was a Democrat governor, Art Link. My last session, we were in the minority in the House. So I've dealt with all the different perspectives, and one thing I learned from that is you got to work with people. Civil discourse and working with people from all walks of life and from political party. Technology has really changed, Chad, from when I was here those 8 years to now. You had the huge bill book. Also, I think sitting down with people and working with individuals, and I see that unfortunately in some situations where there is that rub on the Republican side where people aren't willing to visit, say hi or talk or whatever. I mean, we could have floor debates on the floor of the House, and I remember Earl Strinden should say, it sounds as though the Democrats are trying to line up all the chairs on the deck of the Titanic and just really light into it. And then he and Dick Baucus would walk out together and talk about things or whatever. And that was refreshing to see. We're going to have disagreements here. And that's just part of the political process and the democratic process. But that's what's missing. I think people just sitting down and not making it so personal. And social media, I think, has created that, Chad, as well. It's probably a long answer to a short question, so I apologize.
No, I think it's super interesting. I love that perspective, the historical perspective of the legislature, because I haven't lived through a lot of times. Oh, I've never lived through a time when it was 50-50, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I did, but I would have been a toddler.
Sure.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about sort of the impact on technology, since you were on both sides of it, where, in particular, we have cameras in the committee rooms now. And we have cameras, and even for even longer now, we've had cameras covering the floor debates. And, and obviously there's social media, so a lot of people are doing live streams and pictures and updates and everything as everything's flowing. I feel like that has turned things more performative. I feel like people play to the cameras now, maybe in ways that they didn't. And my career kind of started, when I started, there weren't cameras on the floor session. There weren't cameras in the committee rooms. I also wasn't doing this full time, so I had to rely on people like calling me and texting me and things. But it seems like it's grown more performative. Do you think that's an accurate perception?
I think there's part of that there. I would agree with you on that. Some individuals do that or take advantage of it, Rob, in not a positive way. I think it's also good that any individual, which I've had constituents, not a lot, but people back home in Fargo or whatever say, hey, I listened to that legislative hearing. And I think that's very healthy because people can look back and they can say, hey, what was done? Or the floor debate on certain issues that they have an interest or passion for. Because when I was here before, I mean, we didn't even have phones at our desk. I think the majority leader and minority leader and the assistants had actual landlines at their desk in 77. And then it slowly expanded to landlines for every other legislator, that type of thing. And, people would have to call us on 1-800 and leave a message for us. And, we didn't have internet or anything like that. So I think that's been very good. The challenge that we have as a legislature, which we did then, I believe in 1976, the voters approved going from 60 days to 80 days. So 77 session was our first session where we had an 80-day and an organizational session as well. I think probably, and what hasn't changed, which I wish there would be a change, I get concerned that we're trying to pack so many things to get accomplished in 80 days. And they were not having the ability to take the time to really analyze and go into more in depth. And Rob, I'm not talking about full-time legislature or whatever. I'm talking about, and I don't have the answer to it. Would 20 more days do it or not? Some people would say, well, you would just extend it and you may not get anything more accomplished. But when you look at health and human services and what's being done in that area, this over a $5 billion budget, and human trafficking, behavioral health, and all of those types, from childcare and all of those, are we able to spend the most adequate time to make sure that we're getting a good return on investment? And I say that not from from a dollar perspective, but also from a human perspective. Is that program really doing what we want it to do? And that's what I get concerned about.
Yeah. Well, and the tough part of it then is you extend the session. Now you're asking more from part-time lawmakers. And on our previous episode, we were talking about the struggle of getting working age people in who are in the prime of their careers, who aren't retired, who aren't independently wealthy or whatever.
So then
it's hard. People who maybe still have kids in school. It's hard to
Rob,
follow.
Rob and Chad, would an annual sessions be more beneficial where you don't have as many days, 80 days or
I'm agreeing with you. It's just that's
sure,
the
absolutely.
How do we?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on an annual session. Plus, we need to pay legislators more. I mean, I think that's the reality. It's hard for working families to take a pay cut for that amount of time.
Right. I would agree.
Hey, one last question.
Sure.
First of all, this is a fascinating discussion because
I've enjoyed it.
You're like a statesman. You're like approach the legislature in a unique way. But I also think you come from a very unique district. I mean, I think it's the only district in the state where you have somebody from all three camps. You have the Democrat, you have a moderate, and you have somebody far right.
Right.
How did that happen? Like in this time of sort of sweeping, everybody just votes for the same team.
We have the largest percentage of new Americans in the state, in District 10. It is you'll probably challenge me on this. It is a purple-leaning, blue-leaning district. However, when you come to the new Americans, there are the Christian new Americans and there's the Muslim new Americans. And I think the Christian new Americans really came out in force. They also voted, they're more conservative. And they voted and I know the other individual, Hendricks, really worked hard on getting that group. The new American Muslim didn't come out as strong as what they had in the past. And so, you have Senator Brownberger, like you said, a Democrat, the most conservative to moderate. It is a very unique type of district. And I think that's some of the background, Chad, as far as, and he did a very effective job in getting those individuals out to vote.
Well, it's a fascinating thing. We could talk to you for a lot longer, but
Sure.
we have to end the interview there. I thank you so much, Representative.
Thank you. Anytime. So nice visiting with both of you. Take care.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished up our interview with State Representative Steve Swiontek, which by the kind of diverged into a place I did. Chad, I loved your question, just kind of asking about, the history of the legislature and how much things have changed. That whole thing about multi-districts, which I knew at one point and forgotten about.
Yeah.
And just fascinating stuff and how the legislature has changed over the years.
And I knew he served a long time ago. I didn't know it was like the late 70s. I thought maybe it was the late 80s, something like that. But
You didn't know it was the Carter administration.
yeah, I mean, wow. The Carter Link administrations is when he started in the legislature. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, Governor Art Lake. All right, we're going to switch gears here. We're going to talk a little bit about insurance, which, I mean, let's be honest, it's always on everybody's mind, because when you get sick, you need to be able to pay for it, and insurance is hopefully how you can pay for it. There is an issue, and this was brought to my attention. The bill we're going to be discussing, it's House Bill 1216, is introduced by State Representative Karls. She's a Republican. And it's also being supported by an organization called the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation. Although this issue really goes beyond the particular malady that they advocate on. Really, this is about anybody and what's happening. And Representative Karls she's on with us as is Bill Robie from the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation. But Representative Karls, you can correct me if I'm not characterizing this right. But essentially, what's going on is right now, if you have an insurance policy, you probably have something where a deductible. And you pay out-of-pocket expenses, and that counts towards your deductible. And then once you hit the deductible, a greater amount of coverage kicks in, right? You've maxed out once you've hit your deductible, you get more coverage. A lot of times they start covering everything at that point. But what's been happening is if you are somebody who receives money from another source, so a lot of times we call those out-of-pocket expenses. So I guess we could say if the money to pay expenses for a while comes out of somebody else's pocket, then their insurance companies in some policies now are not counting that towards a deductible. So it means if you're getting some help with your out-of-pocket expenses, that may keep you from hitting your deductible, which of course, protracts the amount of, or I guess it increases the amount of out-of-pocket expenses you need to meet. And so Representative Karls's bill addresses that. Did I get all that right? I mean, is that an accurate description of what's going on?
Very good. It's a hard concept to explain. I'm glad you understand it. And this really hits hard at people with very rare diseases, because in my bill, we cover drugs for which there is no generic equivalent. And so these drugs are so very expensive, when a policyholder hits their deductible, they're basically covered for the rest of the year, and they meet that deductible in the first month.
And now, does your bill apply to all out-of-pocket expenses, or just some out-of-pocket expenses?
Well, in this case, we took the hospital side off the bill. The fiscal note was huge, and we're just covering the prescription side. And a lot of times, now I come from the cystic fibrosis world. My husband was director of their association for 31 years. And oftentimes when they are on the drug that really helps them, it really cuts down on the medical side. So the prescription side is really the important, huge amount.
Now, before we get too far into this, there's kind of an interesting story about how this issue came to your attention. And kind of, I mean, the way it was described to me is, it just, we've been talking about the citizen legislature, and I think this is just kind of the quintessential story of the citizen legislature. You ran across a constituent at a grocery store who told you about
Right.
this.
It was a chance meeting at a grocery store. And I'm asking her, "Well, how are you doing? How are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm on Trikafta. I'm doing fantastic. But when I went to pay for my first month's supply this year, they took my $5,000 gift card that had been given to her by the drug company that manufactures this drug to help her." And oftentimes, drug companies do this. They will help cover that deductible. Well, her specialty pharmacy, which she had to drive to Fargo to pick up, took the gift card, used it to pay for $5,000 worth of the medication. And then later, the insurance company notified her that she has not met her deductible. So therefore, next month, she has to come up with. And this drug, it's a miracle drug. It runs $25,000 to $28,000 a month. And I know that Bill comes from the bleeding disorders world. He
Yeah,
has
Mr. Robie, can you talk a little bit about what the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation is and why this is an issue that's so important to the folks you represent?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, so the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation used to be the National Hemophilia Foundation. Up until about a year and a half ago, we changed our name. I think we are 78 years old, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, patient advocacy group in the country. And we represent people that have hemophilia and other bleeding disorders. And there's a number of other bleeding disorders. There's about a dozen different proteins involved in the blood clotting process. And if you have a bleeding disorder, your body doesn't make one of those. So you have bleeding problems. Our patients, there's no prevention and there's no cure. The only treatment is regular infusions of the protein, the clotting factor your body doesn't make. And it's very expensive. It's human tissue. It's a biologic drug. For years, it was derived from plasma. Now it's through genetic recombination. But somebody my size, I don't have a bleeding disorder. But if I had severe hemophilia, which is most people with hemophilia, a guy my size, it's a weight-based dose. My cost for that medication would probably run $50,000 to $60,000 a month, every month. Because as I said, there's no cure. I usually take it 3 times a week to prevent bleeding. So we started seeing this problem, I think, in 2016, 17, where we had a few patients who experienced the problem that Karen just described. They were using copayment assistance from a manufacturer, and they get shipped their drug from a specialty pharmacy. And then, these patients suddenly were finding they thought they'd met their deductible, they'd met their out-of-pocket maximum for the year, and suddenly the pharmacy was saying, no, we need whatever for this shipment, $15,000, $20,000. And of course, they didn't have that kind of money. And so we got involved with this issue with a number of other patient advocacy groups. We formed the All Copays Count Coalition, which is the national coalition on this issue. And we've been working on this since 2017. And now 21 states, DC and Puerto Rico, have passed similar legislation to what Representative Karls has introduced.
So what changed? Is this a new thing, insurance companies doing this, or what changed to suddenly create this? I don't know which one of you knows the answer better. Mr. Robie, maybe you know. Is this a change recently in insurance policy that created this situation?
Yes. We started we started seeing it among our patients because, again, we have arguably, certainly for a lifespan, the most expensive patients in the healthcare system. We started seeing this, I think the first case was in 2016. This was not an issue before that. We're not aware of any cases before that. And there are other similar, these types of practices by the insurance companies have evolved. I can get into more details. There's copay maximizers, there's alternative funding programs, all designed to mitigate the costs, or it's supposedly, and deal with high-cost patients like bleeding disorders patients, cystic fibrosis patients, multiple sclerosis, cancer. There's a number of groups, autoimmune arthritis, all using very expensive specialty drugs. And this is a cost control mechanism in theory by the insurers. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it coincides with the rise of vertical integration between insurance companies, pharmacy benefit managers, and specialty pharmacies, all being under one roof.
Representative Karls, I guess one thing that's kind of interesting. I mean, and by the way, I was recently on a prescription where I was getting a coupon from the manufacturer that was being applied, and so I guess I could have found. I never had any problems with that, but I guess I could have found myself in this situation. But Representative Karls, the bill I saw had a fiscal note of about $8.5 million. What is that? I guess I should have looked a little bit more closely. But what is the cost to the state? What is that fiscal note deriving from?
That's a good question, Rob. It's very hard to cipher that fiscal note. And I'm going to quiz the guy who wrote it about that.
Who did write it? Where did the fiscal note come from?
I believe it was from the PERS board, their office. The thing is, this is preventing double dipping by the insurance companies. So there shouldn't really be a fiscal note. We're just asking them, telling them, you can't do this anymore. And
I believe the way the bill puts it is basically they can't sell policies that are written this way to do this anymore, correct?
Right. And often this clause is in the fine print, so people don't even see it until they get the sticker shock at their pharmacy counter.
Can I ask you a question?
I'm sorry, just one follow. Is it retroactive at all to existing policies?
I don't know that. Probably not. Your policy goes year to year.
I want to put a little finer point on this just to make sure that I'm understanding it, because it does sound like the insurance companies are the bad guys here. So let's say I have a policy, my max out of pocket is $10,000. I get a $5,000 coupon from a manufacturer. I pay the other $5,000, and they're saying, nope, you have to pay another $5,000. So the insurance company is ultimately getting $15,000 in their pockets when my policy says a $10,000 max out of pocket. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what are the insurance companies saying to this? I mean, this does seem pretty straightforward to me that this is not right. Are they just? I mean, I don't want to demonize insurance companies, but it's sometimes very difficult not to demonize insurance companies in these conversations.
Well, and they point the finger back at the pharmaceutical companies who have to go through years and years and years of research and testing and developing these products. So they have to recoup their losses. That price tag I gave you of $25,000 to $28,000 a month, that's the shelf price. We don't know what the negotiated price is between the PBMs, the middleman, and the insurance and the pharma companies.
Mr. Robie, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, Chad, I can tell you what the payers' arguments are because I have them memorized, and because we're going to hear them on Monday in the hearing. First of all, they argue that manufacturer copay assistance incentivizes patients to use higher cost drugs rather than low cost generics, which is false because almost all copay manufacturer assistance programs are for brand name drugs only. So, which is not to say that generics are necessarily cheap themselves. I have a friend here, I live in Oregon, who's my age. He has multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease. He is on a generic medication. He's been on a few different medications for MS, including brand names. He's on a generic. It's still $13,000 a month, and he uses assistance for that. So that's one of their arguments. The other thing is, which again, it doesn't incentivize patients to move towards brand name over generic, because for bleeding disorders, there are no generics. All our drugs are expensive biologics. There's no generic drugs available. The other thing they will argue is that the federal Medicare program bans the use of
copay assistance. That is only partially true. Medicare does not allow patients to use manufacturer copay assistance. That has to do with federal anti-kickback laws. However, Medicare does allow third-party copayment assistance from charitable organizations. But also, Medicare doesn't, while they ban copay assistance, they don't still then take the money, if you will, which is what insurance companies, they complain about copayment assistance, but then they still take the money and they simply don't apply it to your cost sharing, which we feel is ultimately pretty egregious. That's the double dipping that Representative Karls mentioned. They're going to accept the copayment assistance and then come back to you for the same amount of money.
I want to drill down on something because we've been talking about like manufacturer coupons, which I mean, listen, sometimes the pharma industry isn't all that sympathetic either. But I mean, if they're out there doing things to try to help people pay for their prescriptions they need, I don't feel like that's something we should be attacking. But is it just those, or if say you get really sick and your church helps you pay for something, or a family member helps you pay some out of, do those also not count towards your deductible?
That's correct.
Really? So if I get sick and we're having money problems and my dad writes a check to help me pay for my prescription, that wouldn't count towards my deductible.
If that doesn't have a way to trace it, it might.
Okay. But if
So
basically
if they gave money to
found
you,
out about-
Rob, and you paid your bill, I assume it would count. But maybe if your dad paid it directly, then it wouldn't count?
Right. Tell your
I
dad
do,
not
yeah.
to write the check.
basically if they found out about it, I guess that's what we're all saying here. That's amazing to me. I mean, that's remarkable to me. I mean,
And
that's
it's all tracked now because, 80% of the prescription drug market is controlled by 3 companies. Payers-wise, right? The large PBMs. So they know you have a copay assistance card on file with the specialty pharmacy that you're using because they own the pharmacy. So they can follow it all. So there's no way, so they can see it right there.
especially if you're doing it that way. It's just remarkable to me that even in situations like that where a family member or a charity or a church or something is trying to help you out. And also to be clear, this doesn't just apply to patients with bleeding disorders, although that's obviously a very, very obvious and very important point of pain on this. This applies to everybody. I mean, if you're taking, insulin or whatever, this is everybody, right?
Well, it's if you watch the ads on TV, right, for all the new drugs coming out, and if you see an ad, you'll see at the bottom, if you need assistance to pay for your medication, contact this number, go to this website. But it's generally focused on patients with brand name drugs or simply high cost specialty drugs. I know someone who has Crohn's disease who's on, I think, Skyrizi, and she's on manufacturer assistance. So you'll generally find it with these very high cost specialty drugs. So I want to go back to the price tag really quick because I'm having a tough time wrapping my brain around this. So $8.5 million, and I assume that would be just for public employees. That's the only money that this would be coming from. So if that $8.5 million is true, that means employees of the state or people on PERS have been missing out on $8.5 million worth of coverage. Is that what it says? Is that me connecting the dots correctly? That's mind blowing.
I think what they're saying is this is how much everybody's premiums will have to go up with this bill. But really, they shouldn't, because you're just basically stopping the double dipping. That's why I question the fiscal note.
Because we're not asking them to change the out-of-pocket part of it.
No.
What has been happening is the insurance company has been concerning themselves with how patients are covering that out-of-pocket portion, but their fiscal analysis shouldn't change at all, right? Because how that out-of-pocket expense gets paid, it's still there. The math doesn't change. Unless I'm missing something.
And another point, Rob, for somebody with cystic fibrosis, not everybody can take this drug. It's called Trikafta. But the ones who can lead a productive, normal life. Those who can't or can't afford it, they have a week stay in the hospital twice a year for tune-ups. That's not cheap. 7 days in the hospital twice a year. They're on all kinds of medications, and down the road, they might be eligible for a double lung transplant. That's not cheap, and neither are anti-rejection drugs for the rest of your life.
You know, I
So-
read an article somewhere about how expensive it is to be poor, right? And the reason, their argument, and it made so much sense to me, is if you can't afford to go to yearly checkups, well, then down the road, you end up with a big hospital bill because you missed something that could have been caught at a checkup. Or if you can't afford to do the maintenance on your car, then you have to buy a new car because your car craps out. And that's kind of seems like what we're doing, right? Like we're gonna save a nickel, and it's gonna cost us $100. It doesn't seem like a long-term strategy. And listen, I am a conservative capitalist, and this has got me incensed. Like I'm ready to grab the pitchforks and torches, and
So,
because this
Bill,
is
you work,
infuriating.
Bill, you work for the National Bleeding Disorders. You mentioned that there's 21 states who have already done this. Why isn't there a federal solution to this? Why don't the feds just take care of this?
Well, we've been working on that one for 4 years too. I mean, it took us 4 years in some of the states to get it through. It didn't all happen at once. Yeah, we have a bill. We've been running a bill in Congress now. We'll be reintroducing it this year. Last year it was H.R. 830 and Senate Bill 1375. We get bipartisan support in the House and the Senate.
How about North Dakota's delegation?
What's that?
How about North Dakota's delegation? Where were they at on it?
I don't think anybody, I should know this, I don't think anybody from North Dakota was on the House bill last year or the Senate bill.
That doesn't mean they wouldn't support it. They just didn't sponsor it.
Right. They didn't
but
sponsor
let's
it.
let's get them on the bill. Get them on the bill.
Well, we're gonna work on that. I mean, we have to reintroduce it. With not only is there federal legislation, there's rulemaking involved in this as well. Going back to the Trump administration, the very first term, in what's called the Notice of Benefit and Payment Parameters, which is a rule that comes out every year. It sets all the governance structure and payment structure for Affordable Care Act marketplace plans. In the 2020 rule from the Trump administration, they banned the use of copay accumulators in marketplace plans. And then somebody got a hold of it and they overturned that in 2021 when they issued the 2021 NBPP. They took that out. So we've been fighting to get that back in ever since. And there was a lawsuit filed by some patient groups a few years ago against the Biden administration, and they won. And federal court ruled in September of 2023 that the 2020 NBPP, that rule should go into effect, and accumulator adjusters should be banned in marketplace plans. The Biden administration chose not to enforce it. And they're still not, and so we're working with the new administration to hopefully get that enforced. But that would still be only a year-to-year fix as opposed to a legislative solution, which would be permanent. So there is as much, if not more, advocacy going on at the federal level as well as the states.
Earlier in the interview, you said this started around circa 2016. Was there like a precipitating event that happened, like a change in policy, or is this just an insurance industry innovation?
Well, I think it's the latter. I mean, there's nothing that we're aware of that sort of triggered it. And I just used 2016 because that's the first time we started hearing about
Not on your radar. Okay.
this problem from our patients. And our patients obviously are very price sensitive given their medication, and it's life-saving medication, literally. If they don't get it, they need to go in the emergency room. So that's the first time we heard about it. So we don't think it was in place before that.
Representative Karls, I think you said the hearing's on Monday. What time is the hearing and what committee, and what should people do to help pass this thing? Because I assume you're going to have the pharmacies, the insurance companies, all those folks sort of lined up against this. What time is
this? What do they care?
The insurance companies are the biggest opponent.
Okay.
The hearing is Monday at 2:00 or right after floor session, because sometimes we go long, in the IBL committee, which is Industry, Business, and Labor, in room 327C, which is a hearing room in the Judiciary Wing, at 2:00. And you can also watch it online, and you can submit testimony online if you can't be there.
Yeah, that's all on the legislative website. Very easy to use, very easy to find. Go check that out and avail yourself of it and weigh in, because this is one of these issues that, while we're making headlines about book bans and all the other, crazy things we're doing, well, here's something that could really help people. I mean, here's something where people who need help, and unfortunately, they need expensive drugs, and they have insurance, and their insurance is supposed to cover certain things, and now they're saying, oh, well, because you had help, covering your nut, we're gonna ding you, basically. It's just unbelievable story. Mr. Robie, Karen, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks, guys.
Can I add something?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
To Chad, my dad served in the Senate with your dad.
Oh, yes.
Fun fact.
Fun fact.
We've had a lot of fun facts from legislative history on this show. Karen.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Well, Chad, I'll tell you, I wasn't kidding when I said that segment ticked me off a little bit. Because I just, it's especially the part where it's like, if I get some help from my church or my family or something, and if the insurance company finds out about it, then that's not going to count towards my deductible. Are you kidding me?
And the other thing that irritates me is this fiscal note. I mean, the idea that somehow if they change this, that all of a sudden premiums are going to go up by $8.5 million for state employees. It's hard to connect those dots.
We have a very politically savvy audience, so it would surprise me if they hadn't heard about this. But this is what's called death by fiscal note.
Yeah. And we're seeing it a lot this session, like every other session.
It's basically where when an agency or an interest that gets to do one of these fiscal notes, what a fiscal note basically is, it's where in the concept of the fiscal note, nothing wrong with it at all. But it's where they go out and they ask the state, okay, well, if we pass this bill, how much will it cost us? And they do, they sit down and do an estimate. Sometimes those estimates, they pad the numbers because they don't want the bill to pass. And I don't know why PERS would have an interest in this bill not passing.
Yeah, and maybe we should defer to PERS a little bit, let them defend this on Monday and hear what the reason is for it. Maybe we're missing something, but it doesn't make much sense to me.
I don't know why there would be, other than the fact that for the insurance company, they don't get to keep you on the out-of-pocket treadmill as long, right?
But why would that cost PERS? Like, I don't understand.
Well, I guess it means if it's 100% coverage after your deductible's met, then that 100% coverage kicks in faster. But most of these, especially if you're talking about somebody who has big medical bills and their deductibles, I don't know what it is on the PERS plan, $5,000, $10,000 or something like that. That's a rounding error compared in some of these big medical bills when somebody gets really sick. So the idea that that's making that big.
And again, the pool of people who are state employees on the PERS plan who have these ailments, there's some, but we're not like talking about tens of thousands of people here.
Part of me was wondering if like the Wegovy Ozempic, because that's come in, that's been a big thing. That's very expensive. And so if people, and I know that there are coupons for that.
Yeah. So hold on. Now we can't cover bleeding disorder drugs because people are shooting their tummies to get skinny.
They will cover the drug. It's just if you get help paying for it, they're going to keep you on that out-of-pocket pay treadmill longer.
Yeah.
We talk about why America's become this sort of angry populist country. Well, stuff like this is why.
We talked about the United Healthcare guy getting shot in New York and some of the responses from people saying good, and we were both disgusted by that. But like again,
And remain disgusted by it.
yeah,
But
remain disgusted by it. But then you hear these kind of stories, and it's like, come on, guys, just do right by people. And I know insurance companies have to make a profit, and they need to keep the
and on
premiums
the other side
low.
of it,
And
we have plenty of hospitals and doctors that are running up costs
for
too.
sure, and yeah,
It's a multifaceted problem. There's no one bad guy in this thing, and there's no one silver bullet to fix it. But this just seems it kind of seems dishonest. Like you sign up, and the deal is you have a certain amount of you have a deductible that you hit, and if you hit that deductible because you got help from a coupon or a family or a church or a charity or something, and now all of a sudden it's like, no, that's not the deal anymore because look at this fine print over here.
yeah. And if you're the person that Representative Karls ran into at the grocery store, you've got this diagnosis, you're dealing with all these ailments, and oh, by the way, here's another bill for $5,000 or $15,000 or whatever. I mean, talk about piling on people when they're already struggling a little bit. And to her point, I mean, there's some people who these drugs are the difference between being able to live a good life and have preventive care and not, and being potentially more expensive.
I
Things
really
that
like
can
that.
pull
I really
forward.
like that story, by the way. I think it's I don't know. We get cynical about the legislature and everything sometimes. Well, here's a lawmaker who heard about a real problem in a grocery store from a constituent, and now it's turned into a real bill that hopefully is going to get some traction. We'll see what happens for it, but Representative Karls is doing her part, and kudos to her. That's a great story. You know what surprised me from our first interview? It was a really good question that you asked. Is because every year we get the culture war bills, and we've talked a lot about them, and they're very upset about what might be happening in our libraries and our schools and everything. I looked at the list of sponsors on Representative Swiontek's bill for this, which is an issue. I mean, I saw some Democrats and some liberal people on there, and I certainly saw some moderate Republicans who I would put Representative Swiontek in that camp. I didn't see any of the culture warriors on it.
So, Murdahl's there, Fisher's there, so there's a couple, but I mean, but neither of them are really pushing the culture war stuff. They're probably seen as being in that camp, but no, I mean, they're missing, right? They're more concerned about an anatomy book being at Bismarck High School.
Where's Matt
What's that?
Where's Representative Matt Heilman? Where's
Yeah.
where's Senator Keith's name?
They're not there.
Yeah.
But yeah, more concerned about an anatomy book at Bismarck High School than 14-year-old accessing hardcore porn on their phone. I mean, come on, guys.
I'm afraid some kid's gonna read Henry Miller or Madame Bovary or something.
Yeah, and could you imagine if they read a story about two men being in love?
Right. Right. Yeah. Brokeback Mountain was based on a very good short story by Annie Proulx. If I could recommend it, it's actually part of a whole set of short stories, Western cowboy stories out of Wyoming. It's a fantastic group of stories. Anyway, if I could entertain my literary predilections for a moment. I was that kind of amazed me. I think that's an interesting debate. I'm not sold that bill's the right way, but I guess I'm open to it. We got to start somewhere, and I think Representative
One of the things I was thinking about is how do you regulate gambling, like sports betting in other states online? There has to be some way to do that in sort of a clean way. So like this concept is not a new one to validate age online. I think your question about people over the age of 18, what does that mean in terms of a database of folks who are going to this thing? I saw some people online sort of chattering about that. Should be a concern, but I mean, we can do these kind of things.
And he had a good point too, though. I mean, there's plenty of people that adults who sign up for explicit content online, as is their right, and they pay for it. And I guess that's a database, right?
Yeah.
And this isn't a government database. What this is doing, it's not the government coming in and saying, you have to register for us. If you're an adult and you're choosing to access this content, you have to give them some ID, and that's maintained by the company, and a company that's already, I'm assuming, I guess, depending on their business model, is already maintaining a database of people who have paid them to access the content. So, I guess that makes sense. I mean, maybe that concern's overblown, but we'll see. There's got to be something that we can do. Because it's very easy to find and very easy to access. So that's it.
And kudos to him for moving forward with this bill. Again, I can't say enough about how impressive he is as a legislator, sort of a thoughtful, moderate voice in the legislature. Agree with him on some stuff, disagree with him on other things. But I do think it's interesting, the perspective he had from the late 70s, early 80s. We hear about this in Washington a lot, Reagan and Tip O'Neill. But, his perspective that, back then, Democrats and Republicans were about 50-50. They'd fight like dogs and then go out for drinks. Right now, within the Republican caucuses, they can't even fight like dogs and go out for drinks. They don't talk to each other. Yeah. And so we can do better.
We can.
But really,
I do think a lot of it is how performative it is now. I mean, they have an audience, even at this local level, they have an audience like they've never had one before. And they play to the audience. And that's a good thing. I like the accessibility. I like that when we told people about this bill in the last legislative session, we could also tell them when the hearing was, and they don't have to travel to Bismarck to see it. They don't have to, they could get on the website, they could submit testimony, they can watch the hearing. Those are good things. But
and I will say from my experience, if people do written testimony and they submit it, legislators look at that stuff, particularly if they're not on the committee and a bill comes to the floor and they're like, oh, I need to learn really quick, sort of the two sides of this thing. They'll go to written testimony and say, okay, this is what the proponent said, this is what the opponent said, and make a determination. So I'd really encourage people to do that. They don't have to be here.
I would tell you that if your lawmaker recognizes your name, like you've been in touch with, I mean, not that you should be, gnawing their ear off all the time, but I mean, if you know if they know who you are and you've sent them respectful messages, they will read your messages. No, if you've sent them hateful messages, they're probably going to tune you out. But if you sent them and they know that you're a constituent and they know that you're in their community and you're sending them thoughtful things, they will pay attention. Most of them will.
And again, I think your point, if you're a jerk to them, they're not going to listen to you.
They're humans.
Like anything in life, if you're nice to somebody, they're more likely to do what you want them to do.
Last thing, that there's another book ban bill in the hopper. Well, really two. One looks at studying and it's kind of funny. They both come from Senator Keith Bain. One is going after the libraries again. And this time they're really focused on ebooks. And they're putting in place requirements where the ebooks have to have filters to filter out naughty content. And the problem with that is going to be a lot of those services don't have that. And if they don't have it, it means North Dakota libraries can't subscribe to them, which just means they don't become available. The other one is that relocating a book from the children's section to the adult section is not enough. The adult section also has to be inaccessible to children, which if you've been in your local library recently, that's going to be a problem because usually, a lot of times the children's section is just a corner of the adult section, depending on where you're at. Now in Minot, if they're on different floors, but the children go up, my children follow me up into the adult section. When I'm saying adult section, I'm making it sound, the area.
Like it's scandalous up there.
Right.
Like there's just naked ladies all over the place up there.
But they go up, they follow me up there and they hang out at one of the desks or the whatever. So I don't, basically what they're trying to do is create a situation where the libraries have no choice but to remove the books.
That's what maybe they can bring them into the parking lot and start them on fire. Maybe that's what Senator Bain wants them to do.
Maybe, but he's also got an additional that bill I was just talking about is Senate Bill 2307. He's got a second bill which aims at, and I'm trying to find the bill number. Where did I write it in this article? I must have wrote it somewhere. But he's got a second bill that's essentially Senate Bill 2278. And essentially it studies the feasibility of libraries maintaining copies of books that have been edited to comply with sort of modern, and I think the language he uses, to retain the materials originally published to language that is considered more socially progressive, politically correct, inclusive, or less socially offensive. Now, obviously, he's talking about like the Roald Dahl books, where the publisher, the people who own the rights that edited them. By the way, I didn't like that. I think that's a mistake. I don't want to Bowdlerize books. I think that's left-wing censorship, frankly, and I don't like it at all. But it's kind of funny where it's like he wants to make sure that libraries maintain the content that liberals find offensive, but he also wants to get rid of the content that he finds offensive. And does he not understand the hypocrisy in that? Or maybe he just doesn't have a guiding principle.
But this is the modern conservative Republican movement, right? I mean, it's basically we claim to want smaller government, but we want the government to dictate everything you can and cannot do in terms of reading. And maybe that's too broad to say it's this ilk of Republicans. What Senator Boehm wants to do, Senator Boehm wants to control everything that my family does. What we can read, what we can think, where we can pray, what we can do with our bodies, all those different things. That's what they want. They want us all to think the same. They want us to go into a school and have the 10 Commandments up in the wall, and they think that's going to solve every issue.
If they had the red day, we'd all pray.
We'd all walk in to pray and all feel the same way. That's not conservative, Rob. Having the state dictate a religion, what you think, what you can see, and all those different things. I mean, I've said it before. I'm these big government Republicans. I've had enough. I've had enough. Just stay out of my life, man.
I mean, to me, I've always looked at these cultural issues kind of through a market lens. And the things that, I mean, one of the reasons why a lot of the things that religion espouses, whatever religion, Mormonism, Christianity, Islam, because if you look at Judaism, if you look at a lot of their core tenets, what are they teaching? Take care of your mom and dad, take care of your family, be nice to people, be charitable to people, to be kind. Well, those things work in a society. Those things will make you happy. Those things will make you charitable. They're not always easy to attain, which is why we have religion and self-help and all these other things to try to help us, but when you aspire to those things, you're probably going to lead a pretty good life. And those are the parts of it that work. And the things is when they work, you don't have to force people to do them. You don't have to force people to believe them. So I'm never in favor of forcing my worldview or my point of view down other people, because if I'm doing it right, they should be attracted to it because it works.
Yeah. Yes. And they also want to control our schools to only teach, certain things that they like, where we're not teaching how to be nice to each other, how to embrace differences, how to think those things through. I don't know if you watched the committee work on the 10 Commandments, but they made some changes to the bill, Hoverson did, that now rather than in every classroom, it's just in every cafeteria. And then instead of the state paying for the posters, now charities have to pay for the posters, but they're required to be in. I've talked to some teachers who...
Yeah, but there's no charity that's going to pay for it. Do they just break the law?
I don't know.
I mean, it's a poster, but I mean...
But again, it's ridiculous. Why are we... I mean, and it was, it was a fun committee work to listen to because Chairman Larry Clemene wasn't having a lot of Representative Hoverson's stuff during that committee.
I don't think that bill's going to pass.
I don't think it is either, but it is interesting. I think it was Austin Foss who said the session's sort of chill at this point. I can feel it becoming a little less chill as these social issues are really starting to irritate the normal Republicans.
There was a bill I watched briefly this morning where it was and I'm forgetting, it was Representative Heilman's bill. And it was one of those sort of Ron Paul, it was basically that the North Dakota National Guard, we would not deploy them to a U.S. war that hadn't been officially declared by Congress. And they had some guy on. It was great because Representative Heilman testified, and then he had a guy from a national group, kind of a Trumpy group, and this guy was going off. Says, Pete Hegseth, supports this, and Rand Paul supports this, and it was great because at the end, I just caught it, and I'm forgetting it's the chairman of the House GDA,
Austin Shower.
That's right. Austin Shower was having none of it, and basically said the laws of North Dakota are not set by Pete Hegseth or Rand Paul, and just moved on. Which, and by the way, after that, Representative Jeremy Olson, who I guess I don't know. He served active duty in the Army. He served in the North Dakota National Guard. Graduate from West Point.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's West Point. Yeah,
West Point graduate, got up and testified against the bill. And the juxtaposition of Matt Heilman, who is a few years removed from high school, and a career military man who graduated from West Point. And by the way, who testified after Jeremy Olson was the Brigadier General of the North Dakota National Guard.
And then didn't Dorman then stand up too?
I didn't watch that.
Okay, I think he did. The former head of National Guard, now in the governor's office.
Right. So just remarkable. I guess my point being, when you're talking about the tensions wrapping up a little bit, get some of it. I think people get tired of having with all the bills, and we talk about, I mean, there's a lot of important work to be doing. Representative Karls' bill is an important bill that deserves work. But it's like that has to compete for time and resources with the 10 Commandments bill. And that is
how are we going to fund the public defenders? I mean, there's so many different things that we should be spending time on here.
There's a good debate that we have. I mean, we need a new hospital, but should we be building, investing hundreds of millions of dollars in a singular state hospital in Jamestown? Should we be looking at a more community-based approach? These are hugely important.
And if we do a community-based approach, how do we staff it? I mean, there's like, how do we create a workforce to staff our needs in behavioral health and K through 12 and law enforcement and all these things?
It's difficult and it's hard work, and that's the work we should be doing. But we also have to debate library book bans and everything else. It's just ridiculous.
And if we should hang up a poster in a classroom or a library, and who's going to pay for the poster? And are we picking a state religion?
Absurd. All right. We are we do have a guest booked for next week. When we had Brock Wall on from North Dakota backcountry hunters and anglers about the chronic wasting disease issue, I had a lot of feedback from people, and I was already planning this. They had a lot of feedback from people that said, "Hey, let's hear the other side." So we're going to have the other side on. Dusty Backer is an activist. I don't know if he's affiliated with a specific group or if he's just a citizen who's really interested in it. I guess I don't know. But he is sort of, everybody kept saying this is the guy to have on. So we're going to have him on, and we're going to hear about that. That's going to be on Wednesday next week. So be sure to tune in for that.
And we'll have a guest host on Wednesday. Jay Bell will be in for me.
That's right. Jessica Bell, who we're calling now affectionately known as Jay Bell here on Plain Talk. She's going to be sitting in for Chad, who is taking a vacation, another vacation.
I have a work meeting out of state. I will be on an airplane on my way back on Wednesday.
Got it.
Leaving at 7 a.m. on Sunday, taking time away from my family to work hard.
Okay. All right.
What, do you not believe me?
Well, we're going to fact check it. I'll check with Aaron and make sure that's the story.
Aaron's aware. I assure you.
Okay, good. All right, that's it. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
If you're nice to somebody, they're more likely to do what you want them to do.